Hey everybody, Sony has just finished up their 2018 E3 showcase, and as always, we're going to do a recap and impressions of the entire event. Alright people, so you know how it goes. There's a timestamp if you want to jump right to the impressions of the event, but what we're going to do right now is if you perhaps missed the event or something, I'm going to break down every single thing that went down, and just so you can get caught up and brought up to speed here. But Sony immediately opens up, right? So Shawn Layden takes the stage at a church-type setting. Very unusual. Of course, Sony said that this is going to be a little bit different, and it sure as hell is, but we actually learn what this is not too much longer later. Gustavo Santaola does a musical performance, is the guy that does the musical score for The Last of Us. We go into a Last of Us Part 2 gameplay trailer, which of course this gameplay actually takes place and opens up in a church type setting, basically exactly what they were mimicking. So that explains why it was a weird sort of church thing. But we saw Last of Us 2 gameplay. We'll get into that in the impressions. Then we go into an intermission with Sid Schumann, Ryan Clements, and Shawn Layden discussing a little bit about the footage. So they kind of hang out for a second there as they change the scene of what's going on during the showcase. They show a trailer for Call of Duty Black Ops 3 trailers, a trailer for some map packs coming out. Black Ops 3 immediately available on PlayStation Plus, so that's kind of cool. You know, if you're looking for some Black Ops 3 and you want it for free, and you have PlayStation Plus. Then they show multiple trailers. We're not going to get into the minutia of that. Then we're back to the stage, completely new setting. Opens up with a musical performance for Ghost of Tsushima, along with some gameplay of Ghost of Tsushima. So now we actually see a very good portion of the game, right? Because we really haven't seen much about what the game's all about. Then we move into Control, announced from Remedy Games. If you remember, Remedy does like Alan Wake and Quantum Break. Well, Control, hey, so now we know that this game's actually coming to PS4, considering it's at Sony's show. Then, sorry, my Apple Watch keeps going off. Resident Evil 2 Remake. This is coming January 25th, 2019. This is kind of a big one. A lot of people were pretty surprised about this. This was a rumor floating around for a while. Then we go into Trover Saves the Universe. This was announced for, I believe, PlayStation VR or maybe just PS4. I'm probably going to show you some footage so you know exactly what that is offhand. But this is also for this is Justin Roiland, the creator of Rick and Morty. So if you're into that kind of humor, you'll definitely be interested in this. Going into a Kingdom Hearts 3 trailer. We see a little more Kingdom Hearts 3. This was at Microsoft show as well. Kingdom Hearts 3 PS4 Pro. Very cool. If you are a Kingdom Hearts fan, you are going to be very excited about that. And a Kingdom Hearts all-in-one package available on PlayStation. So you can get all these games available in some sort of deal, however they're going to do that, however they're going to present that to you. Then we finally see some Death Stranding, an extended look at Death Stranding, about 8 to 10 minutes of gameplay maybe, or at least it's gameplay, but we really don't see how the game actually entices us to enjoy walking around with with a box on our back. But we see Neo 2 get announced with a trailer. That's great. I know a lot of us are very excited about Neo because that game kind of came out under the radar for a lot of people, and it turned out to be a really great game. Spider-Man PS4 gameplay. So we see a very good portion of Spider-Man. We see some more of the enemies in the game. A lot of the combat looks really cool, looks really fun. And guess what? That's actually it. What's funny is that the conference ends there, but then they also, shortly after the conference, announced a new PSVR game that's from Software. So which is cool, because that's certainly a little bit different from Software, right? You wouldn't normally expect that. I would love to see them do a take on on a VR game. So we'll find out how that goes, well, somewhat soon whenever that game releases. But that's pretty much it. So now we're gonna get into the impressions. Now, my God, people, I told you. I mean, I don't want to be that guy that says I told you so, but I don't know, it's just it's what I said, right? I specifically knew Sony made that blog post for a reason. They really were straight up telling people, listen, we're going to do 4 games. You're going to see a lot more about these games, and there's going to be some third-party stuff thrown in between. And just a few hours prior to the event, I tweeted earlier in the morning, I was like, I'm excited for Sony's show. Maybe there's a few surprises. And there were, like Neo 2 being announced, Resident Evil 2 being announced. Cool stuff, right? But those are still much smaller announcements, and they're not certainly as heavy or as weighted as what we're used to from prior years of Sony conferences, because Sony has had some extremely strong press conferences, whether it was at E3 or Paris Games Week or PSX. We're used to Sony dropping some serious bombs, but they admittedly came out and said, listen, it's going to be a much different show. And it was immediately different when, you saw the church type setting, and that was, of course, a little off-putting. until you realize it ties into The Last of Us Part 2. Now, if you want to talk about the actual gameplay, Last of Us Part 2 looks great. I know somebody had tweeted me, and I'm sorry I forgot your name, but he said, oh, a lot of that gameplay looks very scripted. If it's anything like the gameplay from the very first time we saw the first Last of Us, then that would actually be a somewhat good indicator, because a lot of people thought that first gameplay for The Last of Us was heavily scripted, and surely it was, but what's interesting is that when The Last of Us came out in 2013, all those instances of scripted moments in that gameplay footage could actually be encountered in a natural playthrough of the game when it came out. So, despite the fact that what we saw in Last of Us Part 2 having some, moments where it looks too good to be natural, certainly you could probably encounter those if it's of any indication. And also, the design of that kiss looked amazing. I was freaking out about this as well, because I don't know, that one moment stood out for me in particular, because if you've seen any kissing in video games, it always looks awkward, poorly designed, and just weird. Naughty Dog did the best designed kiss I've ever seen in a video game. Ghost of Tsushima, you know what? As I was watching it, I was like, this looks cool, but it looks a little stiff. If we're like talking about in terms of gameplay, of course I didn't play it, but if you're like watching and you're trying to figure out what it would feel like to play, it looked very stiff to me. It looked like the gameplay was perhaps a little rigid. Maybe it will be the kind of gameplay with a steep learning curve, but of course that's just impressions of looking at it, right? I'm not actually playing it. Spider-Man looked awesome. Like, I mean, it just looked really compelling, right? Because there's just so much you can do, and that gameplay really demonstrated the amount of ways that you can handle enemies in the game. That's very apparent when you're watching that. Death Stranding, I jokingly said, like, alright, I feel like you could play this game from start to finish and still not know what the hell's going on. Death Stranding's still a game that we need to see a lot more about, but this is the most we've really seen about it so far. And I'm sure as we see a lot more people doing trailer analysis and breaking down exactly each and every moment of that trailer, we're going to pinpoint a few more things that we can figure out, because that's, classic Hideo Kojima. We're going to figure out the greater meaning of this game, thanks to a lot of dedicated fans that, quite frankly, I'm not going to be one of those people that figures it out. I'm going to wait for somebody else to tell me what that game's about. If Hideo won't do it for me, I'll wait for them to do it. And yeah, and then that's it, right? I mean, that's really the four major things that we covered. And then, yeah, you've got that small third-party stuff in between, those two little surprise announcements. Like I said, Neo's going to be very exciting for a lot of people. Same with Resident Evil 2. What's funny is that when the Resident Evil 2 trailer started, it was like this really small perspective. I thought, this looks like a really cool new IP of a game based on a little person perspective, or a little whatever the hell you're supposed to be, right? You're always thinking so many different things as you're watching a brand new piece of gameplay. And then it turned out to be the Resident Evil 2 remake, and I'm not gonna lie, I was like actually bummed. I was like, oh, that would have been super cool if somebody made a hyper-realistic, visually looking game where you're actually like very small. Like, I thought that would have been really cool. But no, that's actually not what that was. Resident Evil 2, so alright. I guess I was wrong there. Now, considering that's like everything that transpired there, there's my impressions. Mainly being that the gameplay was great from what we saw. I had a feeling this was going to happen. That's why I try to temper everybody's expectations that watches this channel, or perhaps has some sort of, that's getting excited about, because E3 is an exciting time, surely, but you have to go into this kind of hoping that, I don't know, because that's what happens with E3. And what I had mentioned a while ago is that if we're talking about the all of E3 entirely, Microsoft stood to be the most exciting show. Maybe Nintendo as well. We'll find out tomorrow. But Microsoft stood to be a very exciting show because they have a lot to gain here. They are having a tough time selling Xbox Ones, and that's why their show is actually so great, because they immediately demonstrated commitment to first party by announcing that they acquired 5 new studios. 5. That's awesome. They took up Ninja Theory. That was a great one, right? I forgot their name. Compulsion Games. They're the ones that did We Happy Few, right? That's actually still slated to come to PS4, actually. But, Microsoft's doing a lot now. And the fact that, here's the thing. Microsoft's show has generally been the same the last 3-4 years, and it's generally been a very big problem for them because they're having a hard time moving Xbox Ones. What I have always mentioned is, like, the problem with Microsoft's show is that they announce all this stuff that's playable everywhere. Of course, there's Microsoft stuff, right? There's, you're going to see your Halo, your Gears, your Forza. those are like a given, right? But they only get so much stage time, and then the rest of the show is just either console launch exclusives, which that's openly admitting that the game is going to go to PlayStation 4, or just general third-party announcements. And it's just you can watch a Microsoft show as a PS4 owner and not have any obligation to buy an Xbox One if you don't like any of their first-party games. That's always been their biggest problem, and that wasn't any different, quite honestly. If you watch Microsoft show, it was kind of the same thing as it's been the last 3-4 years. Lots of console launch exclusives, a lot of just regular debuts of, again, games that are going to be available everywhere. I still think that's a very, very big problem with them, despite the fact that it's also cool of them, because admittedly, from Microsoft's perspective, they should be showing people why they need to purchase Xbox Ones, but from a gamer perspective, you get to see all this cool stuff that you'll be able to play no matter what platform you own. But of course, Microsoft's going in a slightly different strategy as well, because at the end of their conference, they announced how they are preparing for next generation and how they are actually preparing a cloud system that will allow you to play Xbox games wherever you are, depending on whatever platform you own, whether that is an Xbox console, a PC, or a phone. Microsoft's gearing up for the future. I think what was great about Microsoft's show specifically is that that's the angle. They're poised for the future. The fact that they have 5 studios now ready from a first-party perspective, and they're gearing up for next gen, and they're gearing up to offer a console-quality streaming service. This was a Microsoft show that tells you, you know what, this company's going to double down in the future. Not necessarily right now, because you can't just release 5 AAA big-budget, Xbox One games, this holiday season. You have to. Games are a long-term thing. So this was a great show for Microsoft long term, and that's why they did such a great job, I think. Whereas Sony, on the other hand, I think they were just genuinely pressed. They just they could not do a traditional show because they don't have those announcements. Games take such a long time to make, and Sony spaced it out for quite a good time with all their press events, but I think they've just finally reached the point where they said, you know what, we don't have major bomb drops here. We have our games, and they're still a little ways out. Let's just give people an in-depth look at them. All right, now let's go to Twitter. I told you guys you could send me questions at Mystic Ryan after the event was over, and so now I'm going to read some questions and give you some answers. Jacob Lay, would you agree The Last of Us gameplay looked like more of an evolution of the first? Many of the same mechanics remain. I would say so, and I would hope that is kind of what they're going for. I wouldn't want them to dramatically change the game. I would like it to be familiar, but a refined approach from the first game, and I think that's what most people are probably expecting out of it. Fernando, what are your thoughts on Death Stranding's story, and what do you think the gameplay will be? Fernando, I have no goddamn idea. Kyle Boy at 95, do you think that some of these games are being held until PlayStation 5, which I do have a feeling for? Now, Kyle, I will honestly say, I think out of any of these games, Death Stranding would be like the most likely to slip into next gen. It's not totally out of the ordinary for that to actually happen. Possibly, and this isn't me implying that Death Stranding wouldn't be a PS4 game, but possibly it would be PS4 and PS5 for example. And on PS5 you would get way more performance, because I still feel that Death Stranding is a lot further out, which we do have a question for that later in regards to release dates. But I feel like if we're talking about any of these games, I feel like that one's probably the most likely. And this does happen. I mean, we saw Watch Dogs. We saw Watch Dogs before we even realized that was actually a PlayStation 4 and Xbox One game. These things do happen, and if anything, I think Death Stranding's maybe the most likely. Okay, so this is what I was just talking about. Joe Frantic says, when do you think the 3 undated first-party games are going to come out? Looking for general windows here. Because we know that Spider-Man's coming out in September. But what about the other 3, which would be Ghost of Tsushima, Last of Us Part 2, and Death Stranding? It's tough to say. Like, I still think Death Stranding's probably the furthest out right now still, which is why I said it seems more likely that it could maybe possibly slip into next gen. Of course, that's still kind of far-reaching as I'm even saying that, but that one's like the most likely. Ghost of Tsushima, I could definitely see it, doing probably late 2019. And probably same with Last of Us Part 2, if I'm being honest. Probably late 2019. And that would be like the earliest for Last of Us Part 2. I think Ghost of Tsushima maybe is aiming for holiday 2019. Of course, they're not committing to any dates right now because, that's just what Sony's been doubling down on. They don't want to give dates or even release windows if they know they're not going to hit them. Zuber A. Ahmed said, Rocksteady game, ? I don't know either, man. Whenever they're ready. Just clearly it seems like it's not now. Tyler Haight, he said, also, if I may ask, what are your thoughts on the new game control? That looks pretty cool. So when I was watching that trailer, I thought, oh, this is all right. This is looking pretty cool. And it's funny too, is that I am watching it. I was immediately like, this looks like kind of like Alan Wake. This kind of looks like some Quantum Theory type. And then sure enough, it was Remedy, right? So yeah, I'm actually excited. I would love to play one of their games on PlayStation. All right, back to the release date thing. My good friend Jason Moore said, of the main 4 games being shown, which game do you think is released next? So I would say that's probably Ghost of Tsushima. Niles said, when do you think we'll see more Medieval remastered? That's a good question. I kind of was almost expecting that to be here, like maybe a trailer to see what it looks like. If anything, at this point, I'm thinking we're either going to see that like at PSX, or if anything, it might just be a normal press release, right? It might just be posted on the PlayStation blog one day. Here's a new trailer, here's what the game looks like, and guess what? It's going to be ready in like 2-3 months or something, you know what I mean? Because surely the game's probably going to be a smaller scale game in terms of like being released possibly at a budget price, so like a $40 disc game or something like that. So I think they're not making that big of a deal about it. But if we're talking about press events, maybe we'll see it at PSX. Awakened BD said, do you think they're saving for PSX possibly as it's their own show? Recently their E3s have been slowing down, so maybe that's why. I still think that's the thing. They're probably going to be slowing down for most shows in the coming. Here's the thing. If you really look at the timeline here, we're probably not going to have a very exciting Sony show until they're ready to talk about PlayStation 5. Because these are the last of Sony's PS4 games. You got to understand that. Once a lot of these games are shipped, that's it. PS5 projects full stop, which means you can't start showing off PS5 games if we don't see PlayStation 5. So if anything, I'm gonna say PSX again, very tame. If we're doing any German show, whatever Sony's planning on doing, expect it to be relatively very little presence or very little announcements. Maybe heavy third-party stuff because that's something that they can lean on when they're not doing first-party, but. I would expect all this stuff to be pretty lax until we actually do see the exciting stuff, which would be PlayStation 5. Alright guys, I'm pretty much going to end it there because this video is already getting a little bit long on the tooth, and I do try to, edit and upload this as quickly as possible so it's slightly relevant to the fact that Sony just ended their E3. But thank you everybody for watching. I hope you enjoyed another year of the E3 despite the fact that Sony was pretty chill about this one, and I will see you all for this coming Friday for Let's Talk PlayStation, for us to cover up any possible details that we missed or any extra news and news stories or extra details that are released as E3 keeps going on, because of course E3 is not over. People are still on the ground floor playing the games, doing some interviews, so there'll probably be a lot of interesting things for us to talk about this coming Friday. Anyway, I'm out of here for this video, and I'll see you all this Friday. Take it easy.